there. All right. So this is timeline number 14, World War I. For the context for World War I, what eras come before World War I? It's real easy. Okay, it's basically what are the causes of World War. The biggest one is the Industrial Rev. The Industrial Rev comes before the Enlightenment, coming before World War I. That's a tough connection. Okay, so we have imperialism, or should we have Industrial Rev? We have imperialism. In many ways, that's what makes it a world war. And then the last one that plays a factor, of course, is the timeline you're hopefully doing on your own or hearing from me this afternoon, nationalism, okay? What is the single biggest thing that caused World War I? You take a big group of balance of power is a good answer, but there's a better answer, a more specific answer. What upset the balance of power that led directly to World War I? Germany becoming a country and not getting the big boy respect that it deserves. On the timeline, put 1900, 1910, and 1920. All right. So, in here we're gonna put balance of power as the big one. Balance of power is our main focus. What are the things that come after it? Like, we understand the Great Depression. We know that World War I brings about dictators in World War II. The big one I want you to write down, it's called the Age of Anxiety. I didn't make a timeline for this chapter, but your entire DBQ could be on the Age of Anxiety. The Age of Anxiety can be summed up in one statement. Europe is having an existential crisis, right? Remember, that's when we go into the Great Depression. That's when people turn more radical. That's when art gets weird. That's stream of consciousness and stuff like that. All right. So over here, we're going to do first color. We're going to do build up in the war. Give me about a third of the column right here. Again, guys, if you don't know the whole thing, please write them down, because even though it's freshman level stuff, it does play a factor on the AP test. What are the four main causes of World War I? There is militarism, alliances. That's why it's a world war. Ultimately, a squabble between Serbia and Austria-Hungary draws in the entire world. I has two answers. Imperialism or industrial rev. We have militarism, alliances, and imperialism / industrial rev, and finally nationalism, right? Most of the people of Europe wanted war back then. They were ready for war, they wanted war, they believed the boys would be home by Christmas, everything would end, and everybody would be home and happy. Okay? So the biggest impact, yes. Imperialism / industrial rev. Quiet. The biggest thing that comes up most of the time for World War I is two things. A, it's why was it the deadliest war in human history up to this point? Okay, and the answer is simply there's new deadly technology. / the real answer is that this is the first major war fought since the Industrial Revolution hit every country in Europe. It's the first true war where every country is mass producing weapons at a very high level. There's a list of about 9 different technologies and weapons for World War I. We're not going to list all of them. We're just going to give the highlights. The one above all else is what? Maxim machine gun. Maxim machine gun. We also saw that in imperialism because Europeans are using that on non-West people that they want to dominate. We'll put poison gas. And then finally, the two most futuristic weapons of this era would be airplanes and tanks. Other things on this list, I think barbed wire is on this list and a whole bunch of other stuff. But if you remember these, you'll be able to answer any question. Now, how does the war actually go? The word trench is not a key concept, but the war where both sides are fighting but neither is gaining ground is called a stalemate. It's called a stalemate. And what happens when you're fighting a stalemate, you can't outright beat up the other person. You start fighting what? A war of attrition. That's not the word, though. Okay? In order for it to be a war of attrition, right? When Joe and I inevitably get in our fight, okay, this hurts me to admit, but we are very equally matched. I'm not going to be able to dispatch him immediately, okay? So what I'm going to do is fight a war of attrition, which means I don't just fight Joe, I'm also fighting who? No, his friends, but more importantly, his family, right? So if I want to defeat Joe, I should first murder his entire family and all the one friends he has, right? So the total war is this concept called total war. Total war is the concept that an entire country is focused on war. The best way to explain it is to, believe it or not, bring to you a quote from 1792. Do you remember who said the quote I'm about to say? No, 1792. Would be after the Enlightenment is over. We're in the middle of the French Rev. Robespierre. Robespierre said, all Frenchmen are now in permanent requisition for the service of the army. The young men shall go to battle. The old men shall make provisions and stuff like that, right? Total war means your entire country is focused on war. And when your entire country is focused on war, that means your entire country is a target. Now it is beneficial to bomb civilian cities and civilian factories. That's what total war means. So what happens is, since the entire country is focused on war, it causes much suffering. Unlike other wars, which had very little impact on the general population, World War I is a total war that impacts everybody, from the rich to the poor, to the people that live in the cities, to the people that live in the countryside. Since regular people are struggling, some countries during the war are going to have their revolts, okay? So it causes a whole bunch of revolutions at home. Causes several revolutions. By far and away, the most famous revolution, which starts near the end of the war in 1917, is led by who? Is led by who?
Russians. Hitler. What? Hitler was fighting.
Vladimir Lenin, leading the Russian Revolution and the takeover. Okay? All right. A couple other things, same color or different color. Let's put a couple things on here. First off, we know that 1914 might be an Uber date next year because it shows up on all these later timelines. 1914 is when the war actually starts. And the other thing that I want to put on here again is there are two international or European crises in the first decade of the 1900s that helped cause World War I. The Moroccan crisis, and for those of you that have done the timeline already, nationalism, the Balkan Wars. The Balkan Wars. Next color. Non-European theater. For the non-European theater, let's use just like the top half of what's underneath here, right? There's three things we're going to write down. Outside of Europe, do you know what the key concepts are? Which countries are we going to focus on? Japan, number one. It's Japanese aggression. We learned a lot more about it in World War II. We talked about the Japanese, the Greater East Asian Crow Prosperity Spear, where they start to take over the whole world around them. They aren't that successful in World War I, but it's worth noting Japan has fully industrialized and westernized because of the Meiji Restoration. So now they are ready to colonize and essentially take over the countries around them. The other two things on here, all right, is look at a map. One of the bad guys allied with Germany during the war was the Ottoman Empire. They don't do very well during the war. They slowly but steadily get beaten down from the west, and the Russians come in from the east. When the Russians start taking Ottoman land here in the east, there is a minority ethnic group that the Turks have always hated. Who? The Armenians. So what do the Turks start doing? They start moving and then killing the Armenians. It's known as the Armenian Genocide. Another one, the last one, is one that we didn't talk about too much. But if the Ottomans are your empire, are your enemy, right? You can attack them from here. You can attack them here from Russia. But you could also maybe attack them from here. This isn't a formal country back then. This is Arabia, okay? So what the British did was they sent a dude there, and they tried to convince, and that dude tried to convince the Arabs, the Saudis, to take up arms against the Ottoman Empire, right? Common interest, right? The Saudis right here are getting beaten up by the Ottoman Empire. If we can give them a whole bunch of weapons, then we can weaken the Ottomans from down there. That British officer's name was Lawrence. He is better known as Lawrence of Arabia. It's a great movie on it, Lawrence of Arabia. And what this is it's the Arabs versus the Turks. Turks are the ethnic group that make up the Ottoman Empire. Last color. This last color will be the end of the war. This last color will be the end of the war. So, what day do the guns fall silent? What day does the war actually end? 11/11/18. That is Armistice Day. Okay? It'll eventually be known as Veterans Day after we fight World War II. After Armistice Day, the major countries get together and they start negotiating a treaty. We talked about that quite a bit in class. It takes a really long time until July of 1919, and that is when the Treaty of Versailles is officially signed. So, besides the technology and the total war of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles is far and away the most asked question from this timeline. Okay? So first up, the overall big picture thing is that because of World War I, not only is the balance of power shifting, but think about what we've talked about with balance of power. Most of the time we've used that term in the modern age in this class, it's been because France goes through a revolution, so they're going to be weak for a while, right? And England starts to gain power. Germany is formed into a country, so they upset the balance of power. This is the first time that the world balance of power shifts. And the most notable shift for the world balance of power is England is really well destroyed, or Europe, I should say. Europe is very well destroyed by World War I. Who ends up the real winner? The USA. So this is the rise of the USA as a much stronger world force. The other thing is, when European countries are all desperate, poor, broken, and weakened, what do we see around the world?
Emigration.
Rebellion where? In the colonies. This is when the colonies see their chance to gain independence. So World War I marks the end of imperialism. All right. All the way the close quote colonies like Ireland earn more independence. India, the big one, earns independence throughout the 1930s, led by Gandhi. The last one to fall was Egypt. Why did Britain hold on to Egypt so long? Suez Canal, very good. Next line, this is a big one. There's about 50 things we're going to write on this line right here, so write small. This is the Treaty of Versailles. Now keep in mind, every single thing that we write on this line is directly from the key concept. So when I say this is the most tested thing, it's because there's the most information about it. Now, the problem with the Treaty of Versailles is after it was signed and put into place, who was happy?
The West.
No, not the West. Germany's part of the West.
Well, that's Central Europe, man.
Is France happy?
No.
They got 30 million people dead. Is Germany paying reparations anytime soon? You can argue Russia is not a part of the Treaty of Versailles because they left the war. England ain't happy at all. The point for the Treaty of Versailles, this is the actual words they'll use, is it satisfied? Few. Put a star by that. The ultimate thesis statement about the Treaty of Versailles is most people weren't happy with it. It's one of the worst documents we've ever signed for various reasons. Reason number one, nobody actually liked it. The biggest point from the Treaty of Versailles is that it wasn't about establishing peace and reestablishing balance of power. It was about punishing Germany. They punished Germany in a dozen different ways. The most famous thing that they did to punish Germany is called Article 234. What was it? No. It was Article 234 is known as the War Guilt Clause. Article 234 and the War Guilt Clause mean the same thing, but they're both in the key concepts. The reason the War Guilt Clause is so famous and they like to ask questions about it is A, it is ridiculous that Germany has to announce and accept a total blame for starting the war. We know because of nationalism and the way things happened, everybody was going to fight. And since Germany signs a little document that says, haha, all our fault, it's the excuse that France and England use to punish Germany further. The most famous punishment that they levied on Germany is reparations. Reparations that Germany didn't fully pay off until 2005. And then finally, it also, these restrictions placed on Germany were so extreme that it dooms the new government of Germany. They had no chance because of, we remember the hyperinflation they experienced and then suffering the Great Depression. It makes Germany, it pushes Germany go radical, either right or radical left. They go radical right. What was the name of that German government? Yes. Weimar Republic. The other parts of the Treaty of Versailles is the American president at that time. What was his name? This is Wilson's. We're not going to write 14 points. That's not the key concept. They select one out of there that matters for European history. No, but we'll get to that. Two out of there. Self-determination. Okay? So Wilson's self-determination is two parts. Okay? Number one, in Europe, he wants all those Eastern European countries and those new Balkan countries to be able to elect their own governments, all right, for various reasons. The most famous, and they list them in the key concepts, are Poland. And what does the Balkans do? They realize being tiny countries is a bad idea, so they go with Yugoslavia. So if they ask you about self-determination after World War I want you to think future Eastern Bloc countries. I want you to think the Balkans, or I want you to think outside of Europe. He wanted colonies. Or rather, I should say former colonies to have their own self-determination. Why did Woodrow Wilson want former colonies to be able to elect their own government? No. He will say, because we want to bring democracy to the world, and we used to be a colony just like you. No. Guys, after World War I, America is the superpower in the world. And you become a superpower by getting money. How do you get money in the back then? No. Industry and trade, okay? If these colonies choose to keep allied with their former colonial stuff, America can't trade with them. Guys, we didn't get a lot of colonies in the colonial era, okay? So he basically wants to open them up. That's a smart way of doing it compared to Kaiser Wilhelm II, so I'm just going to sail my boats into Morocco and cause a world war. Almost done. Stick with me. Okay? This will eventually come true, but a lot of it's after World War II. The other section is what they do. They're called the Mandate Territories. Where were the Mandate Territories set up?
Danzig and Saarland.
No, they were set up in the Middle East. I know what you're thinking. You're not crazy, but they're not key concepts. The Middle East, this is the first stab at the Middle East, all right? The Treaty of Versailles divides the Middle East up into different, they're really colonies controlled by Britain and France, but we don't want to call them colonies anymore. You guys remember I made you learn the Sykes-Picot Agreement? I think I put it on a test. That's what this is. It's dividing up the Middle East into these places. And, they actually list them. They would be Syria, Iraq, and Palestine. The latter on that list, obviously setting up after World War II, the creation of what?
State of Israel.
Israel. The very last thing on this list, the other part of his 14 points that matter, was the League of Nations. And you can just put a frowny face next to that. Oh, that's a smiley face. Frowny face next to that. Because while Woodrow Wilson, our president, set it up, our Congress didn't vote to join, the League of Nations will fail.